All right, here we are at 12 o'clock. Good afternoon, and welcome to November's Planning Lunches at Noon webinar, implementing C-PACER and smart solar zoning in your community. I am Brendan McDowell, a principal planner in the Office of Planning and Development at the New Hampshire Department of Business and Economic Affairs. All right, so here's a quick reminder before we jump into it, how Microsoft Teams works. So please put your questions in the chat on the kind of a rolling basis. As your questions come up, and we will do our best to answer as many as possible. So we effectively have two presentations today. The first is on C-PACER and will be conducted by James Key Wallace. And so we'll have a short Q&A session after his presentation, so it's just in the middle of the session. So make sure you put your questions in the chat box as he's going through his presentation. And then once he's done answering the questions, we'll move on to Sarah Brock's presentation on new solar zoning guidance for New Hampshire communities. And then Sarah will also have a Q&A session at the very end of her presentation. So with that out of the way, go ahead, James, and jump right in.
Good. Well, thank you, everybody, and good afternoon. I'm James Key Wallace. I'm the Executive Director of the New Hampshire Business Finance Authority, and I'm also Interim Commissioner for New Hampshire BEA. Today, I'm wearing my Business Finance Authority hat. We are the administrator for the C-PACE program across the state, and so what I'd like to do on this meeting is just talk a little bit about what C-PACE is, who it helps, how people get involved, what it's not, and of course, answer any questions that folks might have. So a key term is that word administrator, and basically what that means is under the new C-PACE statute that was passed in the last legislative session, the BFA is the entity responsible for helping both property owners, lenders, and our local municipalities with all the administrative burden of the C-PACE program. It made a lot more sense to centralize those responsibilities into one agency across the state instead of asking the towns to handle this all on their own, just to make it easy for people. And they asked if we would do it, and we agreed. So we're going to start with, what is C-PACE? Some of you may know this. And if you don't and you want more detail after, we'll give you my contact information. We can also talk then. So C-PACE stands for Commercial Property Assessed Clean Energy. It's an acronym. It's not that helpful. What it really is private loans from private lenders. Sometimes they're banks. Sometimes they're sort of specialty lending shops. Sometimes they're a group of folks named CDFIs, which are community development financial institutions, nonprofits. Anyway, folks, lenders, private lenders who make loans to private property owners, commercial property owners, to either make a new construction project more energy efficient or do some improvements to an existing structure for the same reason. All with the idea of the savings that you would get from making these type of energy improvements save you more money than it costs to pay off your loan. And it's interesting because C-PACE is unique. There's a government role here, there's a state role, there's a municipal role, but it's not state money being lent, it's not town or state or federally subsidized. There's still private loans, even though there's this kind of government administrative role. And C-PACE loans are unique in that they are secured by what's known as a special assessment on the property. And I'll explain what that means. So normally when a bank makes a regular loan, a mortgage is filed on the commercial property. And commercial in New Hampshire, by the way, means anything you think of as commercial, right? Storefronts, warehouses, factories, commercial, right? But also, critically, any multi-unit rental of 5 or more units. that's also considered a commercial property. So not single family homes or duplexes, that kind of thing, but apartment buildings, and traditional commercial facilities. So normally when a bank lends to those types of projects, they put a mortgage on the property, just like you do with the mortgage on your house. And then when you sell the property, you pay off the mortgage, the new buyer gets their own mortgage, and it continues. With C-PACE, what the lender actually does is they don't get a mortgage. The town, with the BFA's administrative help, there's something called a special assessment filed on that property, which is really almost like having a special type of property tax lien. It's not the same thing as a municipal tax lien, but it's kind of like that in that it has a very high priority of repayment. It doesn't go away if the project goes bankrupt or is foreclosed upon. And so the lenders know that, as long as someone's in this property, they're going to get their money back eventually. And so what that lets these special C-PACE lenders do is offer very long-term loans. And when you take an energy project and you stretch the costs of that project over a long period of time, because the loans are long-term, your sort of monthly payment is lower, which means it's much easier to make the math work where your savings will exceed what it costs you. So now all types of new improvements become economically feasible from a ROI perspective that normally wouldn't be. So C-PACE fills this neat little niche in the market. One of the things that we frequently get asked, okay, it's special assessment, it's kind of like a property tax. What does that really mean? So a property owner still goes and borrows money from their bank. They also borrow money from C-PACE. They pay both of them. They write a check directly to their lenders like they do anything else. If something were to go wrong, God forbid, the town still gets their property taxes the way you always get your property taxes. It doesn't jump in front of a town or a city's tax base. It doesn't divert any of the normal taxes. This is just an extra bill the property owner pays like they do to any other lender. If something goes wrong and the property is foreclosed on, the bank still gets their money after the town has gotten your unpaid taxes, if any. The C-PACE lender gets caught up on any past due payments, but the C-PACE loan itself, the rest of the loan, actually transfers to whoever the next buyer of the property is. And that's true if the property is sold just conventionally, or because the property is lost if the project, just doesn't work out in the end. So instead of being paid off each time the property changes hand, the C-PACE loan stays with the property, and the new owners just pick up where it leaves off. So that lets developers make long-term improvements without having to worry that, hey, will I really own this building long-term? C-PACE solves that problem. So what kinds of projects can be financed with a C-PACE loan? It's pretty broad and it's defined in state law. Again, it can be new construction or an existing retrofit. It's the things you would normally think of as energy, so solar, biomass, wind, storage, all that. But it's also insulation, lighting, air handling, appliances, roof construction, really almost anything that you can demonstrate, you know, saves money from an energy perspective and makes sense, including making the property more resilient to flood and fire, earthquakes, other disasters, which cost a lot of money to recover from. You can even use it to reduce water usage at the facility if you have, efficient water appliances or plumbing fixtures, or getting lead out of your properties. In a previous presentation, someone brought up the good point. A lot of times where a building kind of envelope ends, but you have the junction of the pipe to the municipal street, that's the property owner's responsibility. And that little stub of pipe, if there's lead in it, it can be a difficult project to finance for the property owner, because if it's like not in the building, it's under the sidewalk. It's like, well, what does that mean? C-PACE can do that. And it's actually a very convenient way to finance projects like that. So why does New Hampshire care about C-PACE? New Hampshire was very focused, and the legislature was focused on stimulating new development, right? But in a way that still allowed, local towns to control what goes where. So this doesn't force you to adopt any new zoning or approve any particular project, but it gives new financial tools if you want more commercial facilities, if you want more multifamily housing. These are new types of loans to help those developers have a higher chance of success and make a better building. So it's also good for municipalities because these types of improvements improve the tax base, right? The values of the buildings go up, the tax base goes up, property owner saves money, and really, kind of everybody wins. Developers really like it because it's another source of affordable debt. So they can improve the value and the marketability of their projects. And it's also helpful because you can essentially borrow more of a total project's cost by combining bank financing and C-PACE financing, meaning your own owner equity, which is usually the limiting factor in, a development project, how much you can put down. You don't have to put down as much. So now you could do two projects instead of one with that same amount of sort of down deposit because you can borrow more as a percentage of the total project. So who does what in a C-PACE loan, right? You've got the lender who lends the money, collects the payment, and handles things if there is a problem. You've got the BFA as the statewide administrator. We screen lenders for quality. So on our website, there's a few now, but we're processing applications for new lenders. So that way borrowers know they're going to a credible lending source. We are the ones who get the applications for C-PACE financing, and we review them all for compliance with state law, all the documents, everything like that. We've made form documents both for towns to adopt and kind of opt into the C-PACE program, but also everything that lenders and projects need on a deal by deal basis just to make this kind of C-PACE in a box, right? Easy. So we handle all of that. What municipalities have to do is approve what we call a C-PACE ordinance or resolution, depending on whether you're a town or a city. This is an opt-in program. So each municipality in New Hampshire has to choose whether they want to opt into the program. We have guidance on exactly how you do it. It's not very difficult. Clean Energy New Hampshire is being very helpful to BFA in that regard through their circuit rider program. They advise towns on all sorts of different tools that are out there. So we encourage you to reach out to them. And also our website just has it all spelled out. So once it's up and running, all the town really has to do is wait. You've opted in, you don't have to do anything. When a C-PACE loan gets approved by BFA, their lender, and their project, we give the town a completed packet that says this thing's ready to go. The town causes the special assessment that I mentioned to be recorded at the county registry of deeds. You can do it yourself. You can have an attorney do it and have that attorney paid for at the closing so that the town does not come out of pocket for any costs. And you don't even really have to be the one to do the work, just have the lawyer do it. It's a one-time, it just goes to the county and the documents are recorded. And then 20 years later, the loan's paid off. We will tell you, hey, lender, they paid off the loan. And now that same document that was recorded at the county has to be updated to say the loan's paid off. And that's really all that has to happen. In the old days, towns had to, under the old C-PACE law, maintain a list of qualified contractors, vet the energy improvements for quality and standards, and do all these inspections. And so we're handling all that now. Some common questions. Does C-PACE reduce or preempt local taxes? No, it doesn't. You get your taxes the way you always do. Does the town or city have to do the billing and reporting? Because you kind of hear it's a tax lien. Does it go through our assessing system, our tax system? The answer is no. The borrowers just get an invoice, a loan statement like they do any regular loan. And of course, does the town have any risk here? what's happening? And again, the answer is no. These are private loans. These are not government loans or backed by, you know, local or state officials. So what do you do now? If you are in a municipality and this is interesting to you, and I would encourage every municipality to opt into the program because there really isn't any downside and it helps your local projects just have another tool in the toolbox to get their financing. You need to opt in. So I would reach out to Clean Energy New Hampshire. I would go to the BFA website, and there are a couple basic ways to do this. If you're a city, your city council can vote. Most towns, if you're a town meeting town, at the moment, you put it on your annual town meeting warrant, right? Your once a year meeting. There are a few towns, about 10 or 11, that are known as towns with a charter. You probably know, that you are, if you're wondering, are we one of those? You're probably not. But if you're wondering, we have the list, we can share, we can let you know. They have the power to have their select board opt in on behalf of the town. And actually, there's a new law being proposed this legislative session to let any town opt in via select board. Because a lot of towns saying, my project needs help now. Like, we can't wait for the annual town meeting. It's middle of summer or it's whatever. It doesn't mean you can't still go the town meeting route. But if you want to have a faster, easier way to opt in, the town has that option. So that law is being proposed. We'll see what happens if it passes or not. But at the moment, it's city council for cities, town meetings for almost everybody else, and then select board for a small handful of towns. And that's all you got to do. So you would opt in, you sign the documents to kind of formalize your enrollment in the program, tell us who your point of contact is so we can send you completed packets, and you're off to the races. And we have all that you would need if you're interested in opting in, model ordinances and resolutions and the process and the public hearing that has to be held. It's all very clearly spelled out. So you can just take it and run with it. And that's it. That is C-PACE in a nutshell. So plenty of time for questions, and just let me know.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much, James. Yeah, that was really great. We've got a couple questions already in the chat. I'd encourage anybody who's here to drop any more questions while we have James. He's gonna have to jump off here in a couple minutes. If you got any burning questions, now's your chance. But the questions that we do have, so Chris asked, can a municipality, quote, opt in for a zone or a quote district that may cover certain zones, or must this be town-wide?
Great question. The municipality can choose any portion of their municipality to opt in. It can be a subset of the town's borders. It can be the entire town. There's really, in our mind, not a lot of reason to not just pick the whole town because you just never know where a project is going to be, and it doesn't obligate the town to approve projects anywhere in town. It just says, hey, for the kinds of projects we want to approve, let those projects go call a new type of lender. And so, we encourage a town or citywide adoption. That way, if your zoning ever changes or something, I mean, you don't have to like ever redo it. So that's our recommendation. And I would say it's pretty interesting across the country. I think New Hampshire is the 28th state to do a C-PACE program like this. It's not new nationally, it's new to New Hampshire, but it's pretty tried and true around the country. And each year, it's billions of dollars in investment, private investment is flowing into projects through C-PACE loans. So it is a real opportunity, for the state and for the towns to kind of see new development, improve existing projects. It's, there's no reason really not to do it townwide, but you can do whatever you want.
All right. So we've got another question from Rebecca. How are the financing rates different from other financing sources, including clean energy developers that offer financing? What are some examples of rates?
It's lender by lender, just like borrowing money from anybody else. In our view, C-PACE loans tend to be very close to bank loan rates, right? Maybe a percent higher, right? So if your bank is 5.5, you might see a C-PACE loan 6.5. They're within what I'd call conventional rates. You're not paying 11% to some leasing entity or something. Um, the real trick is that the structure mitigates the lender's risk. So the rates can be reasonable and the repayment time can be long. That way your payment's small, so your savings ROI that you as a property developer need to do um, makes sense.
All right. And we've got another question from Chris. Has the fix so that county commissioners can approve these been filed as an LSR yet? And if so, what is the number?
Great question, Chris. Very nichey question. I appreciate it. The answer is yes. The same bill that I referenced that allows towns to opt in via select board, or town meeting, if they're town meeting towns, they can do either. Also clarifies that for unincorporated areas that don't have towns, right? The counties are the bodies that, Chris, you know this, but for everybody else, the counties are the bodies that opt in on their behalf. And then the question is, well, is it county commissioners or what's the thing? So yes, Chris, that is there. I think LSRs are actually confidential. I don't think I'm allowed to tell people what the number is, but bills become public very soon, and I'm happy to share it with you as soon as it's public.
All right. And so we've got one more question currently in the chat. Again, I encourage anybody to drop any other questions in there as quickly as possible. But so Stuart asked, does a bankruptcy of the seller-owned affect the lien collectability? So a buyer must adopt the lien terms. Yes? Thanks.
Great question. CPACE assessments are bankruptcy remote, meaning there's an assessment placed on the property. If the developer goes bankrupt, the CPACE loan is not extinguished. So the property is brought to sale through whatever mechanism, foreclosure, bankruptcy proceedings, a taking by the town, it could be anything. Um, the CPACE loan assessment attached to the property moves to the new buyer as part of that property, which they know, and that's part of the um, disclosures and the price of the property. History indicates that CPACE assessments actually increase the value of the property. I mean, normally you think, well, why? There's a debt attached to this property now. It's because that property was improved with that debt. So if the property was worth $1 million before, $200,000 of improvements usually leads to more than $200,000 of value. So maybe the property now is not 1 million, it's 1,300,000 with a $200,000 lien. So someone's going to buy it for 1,100,000. So it's now worth more, even though there's a lien, if that makes sense.
All right, and we've got another question that just came in. Could a developer utilize ERZ and C-PACER programs to get better opportunity?
I don't see why not. So, ERZ and all other types of credit and sort of financial incentive programs, um, you know, they really operate independently from how you finance your project in that sense. So yeah, I don't, I have to look at it specifically, but I don't see why they wouldn't be both usable at the same time.
All right. Well, thank you so much, James, for taking time out of your day to chat with us. Um, And oh, looks like Sarah just dropped something in the chat for folks. But yeah, I really appreciate your time here and explaining CPACE to everybody. And yeah, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll move on to Sarah's presentation.
Thank you, Brendan. Thank you.
And Sarah, I think you're muted there.
Yes, I am. Thank you.
There we go.
I just threw a note in the chat for everyone. I have been working with James and his team on C-PACER to the extent to which we have a circuit rider program at Clean Energy New Hampshire, where we have staff around the state providing free technical assistance to municipalities to support all manner of clean energy projects. And we have a vested interest in helping you to adopt C-PACER ordinances because we're very excited about this tool being available in our communities. So we are compiling a list of communities that are interested in adopting a C-PACER ordinance or learning more or are in the process of doing so. And we're going to be keeping in touch with you and helping you along the way to the extent to which we can. So if you are not already on my list, please, there's a link here. Just fill out the form, get on my radar, and we will keep in touch and keep you connected with BFA as well. So shifting gears, my name is Sarah Brock. I run the Energy Circuit Rider program at Clean Energy New Hampshire. We are a nonprofit. I am sitting in our Concord, New Hampshire office, but we have staff scattered throughout the state who, as I just mentioned, do free technical support on projects related to clean energy. Increasingly, that's not just built projects, although we have an extensive portfolio of solar libraries and old diesel trucks replaced with newer diesel trucks or even electric trucks in municipalities, heat pumps and energy efficiency audits. But anything that a municipality might touch that relates to energy, we can help with to reduce energy costs and to switch to cleaner energy sources. And we increasingly do projects that are also related to local policy related to energy. So solar zoning regulations is certainly part of that. And I'm here today to talk a little bit about what my team has been doing over the past year, working with communities to update guidance on how New Hampshire communities can regulate solar and permit solar in ways that make sense for communities in 2025 and beyond. There was a previous set of guidance that was published in 2018 that some of you may be familiar with, and I know some of you adopted a previous New Hampshire model solar zoning ordinance that was fairly out of date. And so this past year, we partnered with an organization called SolSmart, a Department of Energy funded program that specializes in providing technical assistance to municipalities to look at best practices in solar zoning. So we partnered with them. We ran a cohort, and I know many of you, some of you on the call today participated in that this year called SolSmart New Hampshire, where we provided some training and we worked together on understanding and implementing best practices related to solar zoning and permitting. And as part of that, we published an updated set of guidance and a model solar zoning ordinance for New Hampshire that we believe is current and more likely to be evergreen. And I'm going to help you understand why we did that and what is in that resource today. So some notes about why you really ought to address solar directly in your zoning code. And pardon me for a moment while I locate my notes, which got turned around as I was moving things around. The couple of things that you need to know are that you will be seeing more and more solar proposed and built in your community at all scales. And I've got some pictures in a few minutes to show you the different scales I mean. But that's everything from a few panels on someone's roof to a large field filled with panels, effectively a power plant of solar. We also know that electric demand is growing nationwide and in New Hampshire. That's part of why you're going to see more solar proposed and built. It won't just be solar. We're going to see a lot of new electric generation across the country and in New Hampshire. But I think in New Hampshire, solar generation will probably be a lot of what you see in terms of new power generation coming on board. Now, many of you have heard that there have been changes in the federal tax credits related to solar, and we do expect there will be a bit of a blip in terms of demand for solar as a result of the changes in the deadlines for those federal tax credits. However, that is a blip, not a long-term trend. Solar has become very cost competitive. Solar built at utility scale as a power plant is competing and often out-competing other types of power generations. And it is globally the cheapest source of power generation, and that trend is going to continue. So all of that boils down to you're going to be seeing more solar. And my team, because we have been out in communities supporting communities on clean energy projects, has seen more times than I would like to admit communities approached by a developer or a property owner seeking to develop solar, and that community does not address solar in their zoning code, and those projects fall apart. They cause a lot of extra headache and waste of time on the part of staff and those planning and zoning boards. And we have come to understand that addressing this proactively is in everyone's best interest as we start to see this industry grow in our state. So what else was I going to mention before I dive into this for you? I would say that some of what we are hoping to address by showing you this model ordinance today is to help you to be proactive. I mentioned that we see a lot of communities that get caught off guard by proposals for solar of all scales. It is much better to have conversations about appropriate solar regulations before you are under pressure because there's a particular project that's been proposed. I also would say that part of what we're trying to do here is make sure that you're not creating unintended barriers to solar for the types of solar you would like to see. We have communities that don't mention solar in their zoning code, which can actually create issues for residents and business owners who would like to have a right to access solar. So I'll walk you through some of those things and how this conversation can help you avoid them. A few pieces of advice before I dive into the ordinance with you. Some of the things we're trying to do here are in your solar code. If you mention solar at all, often solar is may not be mentioned in all of the specific terms that are relevant. Solar has changed a lot in the last few decades. There are many, many different kinds of solar, and it's important to have the right definitions and address all of those different situations. The second piece of advice here is that it's important to have proactive conversations about what types of solar can be approved by right, because there are likely kinds of solar, for example, rooftop solar and small systems that you do want to clarify and make sure that folks can access. Third, it's important to have clear and predictable standards that balance solar resources against other priorities your community might have. And the solar ordinance can help you do that. Fourth, as I mentioned, we're trying to avoid unintentional barriers to solar. Fifth, we're trying to make sure that we proactively capture co-benefits of solar. For example, there are communities that have old industrial sites or a capped landfill that they don't otherwise know what to do with. You can use a solar ordinance to specifically call out areas like that as being areas you would like to see solar. You can also specify regulations around how you want the land under and around the solar array to be treated to promote things like habitat regrowth and pollinator species. The last couple points here, we want to make sure that you are proactively considering other concerns and interests of the community, like historic districts, and being thoughtful about how that relates with solar, and that can be addressed proactively in an ordinance. And then finally, maintaining consistency across the region is something that we care about as Clean Energy New Hampshire, because that is part of what supports a thriving solar industry, is when we have some consistency in how this is regulated across the state. So let me just review a little bit of the types of solar that we are talking about regulating. These examples here are all examples of what we call accessory solar, and the ordinance distinguishes between accessory solar and solar. Accessory means that you're installing the solar as accessory to a use on the property that is pre-existing, typically a building. So rooftop residential solar is a good example. Commercial rooftop solar is another good example, which can look different depending on the building. This is an example of a flat commercial rooftop and what that array might look like. And then accessory ground-mounted solar for either residential or commercial use, where there's a portion of the property adjacent to an existing building that is providing the power for that building. We're also talking about regulating primary use solar, which is where the use of the land is the solar. These are effectively power plants. The power is going directly to the grid. It's not going to power an adjacent building. We see 3 examples here on the left. This is a fairly typical field with rows of solar panels that is pushing power into the grid. The middle picture shows uses where sometimes by design you space the panels and you talk about what kind of vegetation goes underneath them to promote either active agriculture, or in this case, this looks like pollinator species and that sort of thing. And then finally, we don't see a lot of this yet in New Hampshire, but there are certainly examples across the country of large power plant scale solar that is tied with energy storage on site. These are on-site batteries. We have not seen much of that in New Hampshire, but that is certainly something that we expect to be coming in the coming years and decades. So these are the sorts of projects that we're talking about, expecting to see more of in your communities and wanting to proactively regulate. So, interesting. So, there's your hyperlink. So we have a resource that I would like to show you, and I would love to get help from Brendan and the team to see if you can't help me figure out how to screen share and bring up the ordinance so I can show folks what that looks like. Do you have a suggestion about how to do that in our little take control, leave control mechanism?
Give me 1 second. Maybe I can,
Yeah, no problem.
perhaps I can share this.
Terry, you can share the screen. It'll switch the presentation off.
Okay, that sounds
Brendan,
great.
you'll bring it back.
Okay.
Perfect. I will try that in a moment. Before I dive in, I want to highlight the goals of this ordinance for you. Goal number 1 ought to be that residents and property owners have the opportunity to install solar on their properties, and that we are making it clear what the guidelines and the rules are if they want to do that. We're saying to them, yes, if you want to have a small rooftop or ground mounted system that's accessory to your building and providing power for you, you can do that. And here are the rules, and here's where you can do that. In many communities, even that is not clear. So that is your priority number 1 in establishing clear solar regulation. Priority number 2 is for all the primary use solar, the solar that is not immediately attached to a building that's pumping power into the grid. For those projects, similarly, we want to be clear about what locations are appropriate, what kinds of projects you want to see, what the standards are for those projects, and where it's not allowed. There are places that are more and less appropriate for solar, and we want to be thinking proactively about where it is appropriate and where it isn't appropriate, and where large scale solar can add value for your community. These are things we ought to be talking about proactively as opposed to reactively. And then finally, you are going to see more solar projects proposed, and having a clear solar zoning ordinance helps you shape what those projects look like. It also helps you be efficient in how you process those permits. It saves staff time, and it saves the time of your volunteers on those planning and zoning committees when the regulations are clearly cut out. So let me attempt a screen share here, and I will show you what this model looks like, how to navigate it, and how to get help if you're interested in taking some of what's here to incorporate into your own zoning code. Okay, I think I figured it out. Are you all seeing my screen?
Yep.
Great, look at that.
If you could just make it larger, because you're making
I
it small
will.
right now.
Yeah, I'm adjusting the scale of it slightly for you. How does that look, or is that not so good? Is it showing your whole, is it showing my whole desktop or is it just showing the window? I
The
apologize.
whole it's showing the whole
Okay,
desktop,
got
but
it.
I can read it. Perhaps if it was just slightly bigger
Yep,
would
you
be
Yep,
can zoom
perfect.
out
sounds good.
now. Yep, there you go.
Yep.
Perfect.
Okay, we got it. So this is the model solar zoning ordinance. I'm going to put a link to it in the chat for you. This is a living document, which means that it exists as a Google Doc. It's linked on our website, and you can always find it by contacting me. There is a date by which it's last been updated, and we are adapting it over time as we work with communities to implement it and learn where it needs to be tweaked. What is included is some background information that ought to help you to have conversations and use the right vocabulary when you're talking about solar. There is also some context around how to use the model itself. And then there, of course, is the model. So I'm going to scan you through some of the key sections and then open it up for questions. There's some language here about why you would want to include solar in your zoning ordinance, which is meant to give you talking points when you bring this up with your planning committee or your select board. There is also this relatively extensive but condensed section on solar and solar trends to help you feel current in understanding the technology. There's some data and links to resources related to trends in solar to back up that claim I made that we are going to be seeing more solar and that this is worth paying attention to now. Pardon the scrolling. There's also a Solar 101 section that breaks down the details about how big these panels are, what they look like, uh, what behind the meter, in front of the meter means, what energy metering is. These are fairly important concepts if you're going to be diving into regulating solar. I'm not going to dive in now, but it's all here for you. Pardon the scrolling again. There are some pictures and definitions of the different types of solar. I showed you some pictures earlier of the different types of accessory use and primary use solar that's broken out in more detail here to give you a better sense of what you're regulating. There's some discussion of energy storage, but there's not a lot in here because this is relatively new to New Hampshire. There's a relatively extensive section with some resources about how to address solar in historic districts. There's some resource around the mechanism of creating an energy overlay district, which is something that some communities may want to consider if you get into the conversation about what areas of the community you really would prefer to see large scale solar, creating something like an energy overlay district to help clarify those areas may be helpful. So there's language and some guidance on how to go about doing that. There's also a section here that lists all of the relevant RSAs, the New Hampshire laws and statutes that relate to solar and what you can and can't do to regulate solar at a local level. They're all linked and they're summarized to help you understand how your local zoning regulation fits into broader state legal contexts. And then we get into the document itself and how to use it. So all of that piece was background, and hopefully you will find it useful. If you have any questions about any of this, my team is available. There is some detail about how this document came to be. It was created by SolSmart and my team with consultation from planners and solar developers. It was a relatively comprehensive process to pull this together. There's some notes on how to save a copy. I noticed a question from Chris, can a Word version of this ordinance be provided? My recommendation would be to log into this Google document and download a copy as a Word document yourself. And if you have trouble with that, let me know. There's some comments about whether to adopt these recommendations as a standalone ordinance versus baked into the rest of your ordinance, and that really is a local decision, although we would be happy to talk about the pros and cons. We talk about why certain things are recommended and how you can get more detail. we walk you through our recommendation for how to have a conversation about where solar is appropriate in your community, specifically that primary use solar. We find that for the most part, the accessory use solar, which is the solar on someone's roof or in a property's backyard, is relatively non-controversial, and all we're really looking to do in our regulations is clarify what is and isn't allowed and what the standards are, and then streamline that permitting as much as possible. When it comes to primary use solar, it's more complicated, and it's more a conversation of where do we want that kind of development, where we're talking multiple acres of rows of solar panels, and where don't we want it and why, and how can we clarify that in the regulation. And there's some steps here in the ordinance to help you think through how you might approach that, including where to find capacity maps so that you can even see where you currently have three-phase electric power, which is a prerequisite for developing any kind of large-scale solar. And then there's some guidance around how to go about creating a permitted use table that is appropriate for solar, and what kinds of different definitions of different types of projects are appropriate when you're compiling a table like that. Pardon the scrolling. And then we get into the model itself, which if you are seeking to use it, as I mentioned, it's designed to be a fairly comprehensive template. It can be save as and then edited, which many of our communities have done, and it goes through all of the typical sections. I will note that it differentiates between accessory use and ground-mounted solar, as you have heard me, ground-mounted primary use solar, as you've heard me do today, and there are separate standards and submission requirements related to those things. And you will find that throughout the model, there are many footnotes where we call out and suggest that if you have existing regulations related to other things that are not solar, that you reference those and make them consistent with what you're proposing for solar. One of the other goals of, and I'll stop sharing now, one of the other goals, and feel free to put up the other slides or tell me if I need to do something to help you do that while I'm talking. One of the other goals here is that as you update your solar zoning regulations, that you try to make sure that solar is being treated similarly to other similar types of development with respect to the standards that you're applying. Treat the backyard solar array similarly to how you would treat a backyard shed in terms of what the setbacks might be. Treat solar on a commercial roof similar to how you would treat the HVAC system on top of that roof in terms of exemptions to height limits and that sort of thing. And there's guidance throughout the document flagging the different areas where you should be cross-checking the rest of your zoning regulation to make sure that you've got consistency in how you're treating solar and how you're treating other comparable things. Now, a couple of frequently asked questions before I open it up to you. We often get the question of whether to adopt this as a standalone ordinance or to integrate it into your existing regulations. My answer is typically it depends, because no two zoning regulation sets are alike. And I would say for some communities that have a very robust zoning ordinance, you may find you would like to integrate the solar piece into the existing structure that you have. But there are other communities that are used to having standalone ordinances, and that is how you prefer to address something like this. As long as both the accessory use and the primary use are addressed uniquely and the expectations and regulations are clear, it really doesn't matter either way. The second question is I'm going to skip that. I think that's a carryover from a previous slide deck, but the other is a question I get from small towns. Why bother adopting solar regulations if our town doesn't have three-phase power? And I would say the response to that is if you're in a community, and there are many in New Hampshire where there is no access to three-phase power, which means you will probably never see, without electrical system improvements, a standalone primary use ground mounted solar array, it still makes sense to adopt an ordinance that includes reference to primary use ground mounted solar because you just don't know what's coming. I would say you could talk to your regional planning commission. You could even talk to local solar developers to get a sense of whether there isn't actually more reason than you would think to want to still address large scale solar in your ordinance, even though there's no technical way to do that currently. And there's really no downside to having a more comprehensive ordinance than you might currently need. The other thing I would say is that even if you don't expect to have much more than residential or small commercial scale solar in your community, the act of clarifying that those systems are permitted and what the standards are can save your town staff and your volunteers on your planning board, and crucially also your residents and your property owners who are trying to install solar a whole lot of time and even money. There's a lot of conversation in the solar industry right now about soft costs as a way to help continue to lower the cost of solar, even as we see tax credits going away. And it is very true that the barriers related to permitting and getting projects authorized to build is a large part of the manpower cost of installing solar. And as we can begin to smooth and clarify permitting processes and regulations around solar, we should see costs start to go down for those solar projects as well. I'm going to throw up these resources and then ask if we have any questions. There is a recording that goes into much more depth about this ordinance that is linked here. There is also a guidebook published by ICMA, the International Council of Municipalities and Counties, and they are the home of SolSmart, and they've published a whole lot of really great guidance about large-scale solar that's here. And my counterpart there is a woman named Deb Perry, and her email address is here for more technical assistance through SolSmart. And of course, you can always reach out to me. So I would be happy to take questions.
All right, excellent. Well, yeah, thank you so much, Sarah. That was an excellent presentation, and I certainly learned a lot. I don't see any questions, which means you must have answered them all. If I guess we can, we've still got some time. So if anybody is in the process of typing a question, we could give them a moment. But yeah, I don't know, any last minute thoughts or anything while we eat up a little bit of time, just seeing if anybody has any questions.
There's one other thing I could mention, which isn't in my slides because it's relatively new, but we're starting to raise awareness about it. For communities that are interested in where they can and should touch clean energy from a planning and zoning and regulation standpoint, there are 3 pillars you should be paying attention to. C-PACER is one, and James did a great job reviewing what that opportunity is and how you might go about it. Adopting a C-PACER ordinance to allow that mechanism to be available in your community. The second is taking a good look at your local solar zoning, which is what I just addressed. The third has to do with solar permitting. And I hinted at it a couple of times in my presentation, but part of what the SolSmart cohort did this spring with myself and my colleagues at the SolSmart National Organization is really look at what could be done to streamline permitting and make permitting more transparent. The communities that went through our program and are getting SolSmart designated with us right now mostly did that by creating checklists where they simply discovered what the current process for permitting solar in their community was, and they just wrote it down in a piece of paper and they posted it online. To be clear, typically it is not obvious if you were to go on a municipal website what the process is to permit solar, and typically someone's got to call and you've got to figure that out. So simply posting a permitting checklist related to solar on a municipal website does help. The second thing that helps, that's the next level up and arguably might actually be a simpler and more sensible way to approach it, is to partner with an organization called Solar Act Plus. This, when I first heard of it, I thought it literally meant an app, like for your phone, but app is an acronym. It stands for Automated Permitting Process. This is an organization, I believe they are set up as a nonprofit. They spun out of the national labs and they were funded by DOE to try to figure out a way to provide municipalities with a very, very easy way to automate the simplest kind of solar permitting, which is rooftop residential solar permits. And what this organization has done is they've built a website and a whole structure for having installers type in the information about the solar array, the rooftop solar array in question, enter it into the system and have it checked against all the relevant codes and all the relevant local requirements, and then automatically permitted if everything checks out. The benefit of that being, and this has been implemented in other states in the country very successfully, the data shows that projects are more likely to meet code and more likely to pass inspection if they go through this automated process. And from the municipality standpoint, it's very, very easy to get set up. As I've been just told, it's a 20 or 30-minute call with the team at Solar App Plus, and they get a sense of what your permitting requirements are and what your local regulations and code are. And then they go and they plug it in and they create your own your own special section of their website. And then you get to link to it on your website. And you can say to developers, if you are installing a rooftop system, you have the option of going and getting an auto permit from Solar App. And it will send them to the site. It will have them do that. They'll have to pay a $30 fee, which is how Solar App Plus keeps their lights on. But most developers are very willing to do that because in exchange, they can just go ahead and start scheduling the project as opposed to waiting. And you as the municipality, then if everything checks out, just get an email saying, hey, we just permitted a residential system. Here's what you need to file, and has everything you need there to then process the inspection later on. So very easy. And if anyone's curious to learn more about that, I've been very impressed by this organization and feeling like a lot of communities really ought to do that. It will save a lot of municipal headache and time to get that whole chunk of solar applications off of your municipal staff to-do list.
All right. So we got a couple enthusiastic thank yous in the chat for you for your presentation. I actually had a quick, well, maybe a quick question, maybe not a quick question, but I was just thinking about we've had a couple inquiries recently about data centers and how energy intensive they are, and so I was just wondering, is there anything in there that maybe talks about uses that are intensive, use intensive, energy or water, or, whatever it is, and how to maybe work something like that as a requirement into, solar ordinances when you've got these, larger commercial uses that,
Yeah.
yeah, anyway, if that made sense.
Oh, it made plenty of sense. I think that that's a complicated case and a less likely case, at least historically in New Hampshire, because of our landscape. We don't tend to attract, and for example, we are not ground zero for the data center development for a reason. We're called the Granite State. There just are not big swaths of open, easily developable land to put a data center. That being said, your point is well taken about large facilities with large energy uses. The way that the ordinance treats that is still very much, if it is truly accessory, you could have a very large accessory facility, but it's still quite limited by the on-site use, and you're not likely to see acres and acres that is called accessory, and the regulations that you would apply to an accessory for a big manufacturing plant versus Main Street bookstore are going to be different, but or rather they're actually can be somewhat the same within that category. So I think that'll be something we learn over time as we see this get applied. But in our developing of this, we really landed on the distinction needing to be less between larger accessory and smaller accessory, and more between what is accessory to an actual on-site use, even if it's a large manufacturing or otherwise energy intensive use, versus what is the 1 to 5 megawatt or 100 kilowatt to 5 megawatt or more acres of solar that is not attached to an existing use. That is more of a land use regulation question that's separate from a facility. That's where the important distinction lies.
Perfect. Well, yeah, thank you for answering that question. I don't see any more in the chat, and we're right on the dot at 1 o'clock. So perfect timing. I know we had slotted for a longer session today, but yeah, yeah, that's great. Well, thank you, Sarah, so much. And yeah, I look forward to reading through this a little bit more, and hopefully the rest of the folks here are as well. So yeah, thanks for coming on.
Great, thank you.
All right, bye everybody. Thanks for joining.